Hello, hello, and welcome to episode 54 of Trails in the Pod. I'm Colin. That's Kevin.
No intro today. I want as much time as possible to be spent talking about Trails from Zero, Colin.
Dude, we're finally here. I've been hyping this game up. People have been hyping this game up. Finally, we get to start. I'm just going to say out from the beginning, there's stuff we want to talk about, and I'm not saying that we will split this up into two episodes, but there's the potential that this is going to be split up into two episodes if it goes over like an hour and a half or so. So just be on the lookout for that, but it'll be pretty obvious in your podcast feed. Kevin, first impressions. How do you like Trails from Zero?
Thought it was a great game. It felt so good to be getting back into the Kaseki series after a bit of time away. It felt good to be getting back into a living, breathing world after even more time away. We finished SC in December or so it's been, 8 months about since we really interacted with, the non-Phantasma cloistered environment.
I mean, it's true. I mean, not to say that the third is a bad game. It's not. It's a great game, but it's not the same kind of explore the world, have different side quests, different people to talk to kind of environment that we got in FC and SC. So this is a bit of a return to form.
And return to form it is. It's a new setting. We are in a new arc completely. New characters, new
Yes.
themes, new everything almost.
To me, it's kind of a breath of fresh air, especially now that we've been consuming a lot of the side content. There's only so much Joshua and Estelle you can take, especially when things like Advanced Chapter or Sora, Ys versus Sora no Kiseki, I mean, they're fine, but they're not meant to, move anything along, right? It's just more stuff with them in it. Kind of the same with Ring of Judgment. Whereas now, it feels like things can start moving again.
You know my thoughts on Estelle and Joshua even being in the third. I felt their story was done at the end of SC. Not done completely, but done enough for us to bear witness to it. Time to move on. So I'm excited to be getting to know new people, new arcs, new conflict and growth in these two games.
Well, speaking of getting to know them, we're kind of thrown in medias res isn't even the right word for it, because it's pretty much at the end of the game. We have this small opening sequence where you control all four members of the SSS, and it looks like you are raiding some kind of base of some kind. It looks eerie, occultish, hellish even. Kevin, what did you think about this opening?
So I remember from playing Cold Steel 1, it began with the same thing. Late game, all your party together, and you don't know what was going on. You're thrown into combat and so forth. That was 10, 15 minutes. It's been about 2 years since I played it, so I can't quite remember. But there felt some substance there, and we saw, big artillery going off. Here, a minute or two, I was just confused. We didn't get hardly anything, so I'm eager to see what we get to it and when and how and why. But you saying it was one of your favorite opening sequences, there was hardly anything to like. It's not a criticism, it just is.
Right, and I feel like maybe I shouldn't have even said anything, but I am going to say it because I think it's important to know. You're right that if you have no context for anything else, what is this? It seems like a flash forward. You pick up a few bits of information that could be kind of interesting, such as this place seems hellish. It's compared to Gehenna. There's demonic influence. There seems to be some kind of group that these four people are fighting against. So you can also tell that these four people, they trust each other, they rely on each other. You can tell that this is a tight-knit group, so you can get some information from that. There are events that happen later, not in this game, but in a later game, that when you get there and you think back to this moment specifically, it will blow your mind. It will absolutely blow your mind. And there is, yes, you'll find out by the end of this arc what I'm talking about.
Is it Azure?
No, it's not Kuro 2 or anything like that. No, it's at the end of Azure. You'll see why I think that this is actually incredibly well done and why it's my favorite opening by far. something kind of hints towards it even in this that I will not talk about because you didn't notice it and I don't want you to guess. But
Is it the demons, Gehenna?
I will say no more. In any case, but you're right that without any context, that looks like nothing. And so you then suddenly wake up on a train. It seems as if Lloyd had been dreaming that whole thing.
We wake up on a train heading to Crossbell, where one of the first things that we are told is the city is almost unrecognizable. Lots of development going on. And as a proud Yimby,
Yeah,
YIMBY, I'm happy. And Colin, I'm concerned Lloyd does not like all this growth and development. He seems fine, but if he's a NIMBY, he has to die. I'm sorry.
So for those who are confused as to Kevin's internet speak, I believe that NIMBY stands for not in my backyard. But Lloyd does not strike me as somebody who's like upset about all of the progress that Crossbell has made. What we learn on this train from a guy who turns out is the president of a business owners association is that ever since the non-aggression pact was signed, a ton of capital had been flooding into Crossbell. Specifically, Crossbell serves as almost as a financial hub, kind of like a Switzerland to some degree. Banking's a huge thing in Crossbell, and because of the vast amounts of capital being piled in, a lot of infrastructure had started to be built and built pretty quickly. High rises all over the place. You see a lot more orbital cars on there as well. I don't wouldn't say that like highways are really a big thing, but certainly the city can accommodate wheeled vehicles. I just think that it's interesting that we're seeing a real world impact, quote unquote, for the non-aggression pact.
And as we'll see later on, it's not just winners here. There's losers, there's cracks that form because of this influx of capital and people to go with it. I think it's a very realistic, grounded portrayal of what this sudden change does to the economic and social structures within a city. It's very well done.
Totally. And something else that I find interesting too is that in the same description of the economic conditions, we also get a little bit of a tease to the political setup of Crossbell, which is that the business owner guy makes an offhand comment that you can't trust any of the politicians except Leader McDowell. And we'll meet him, but it's always interesting. Like, we never got anything like this in Liberal, where people were openly critical of and distrustful of their government. Whereas in Crossbell, I haven't seen anybody that actually thinks that their government is doing a good job. And this goes from the political establishment to the police force, which we'll talk about in a second as we start talking about the creation of the SSS. But it's a stark contrast to what we had seen in Liberal. What did you think about that?
You know how I said it was grounded? This red line, this through line continues here.
Yeah,
Politicians in Liberal were almost superhuman. The Queen was awesome. They were all working for the betterment of the state for the most part. Here, it's there's blatant factions in the Diet, that are blatant proxy pawns for the great powers. There's open corruption. There's people like Mayor, President, Prime Minister McDowell, McDouglas, but it's weak, or I'm not sure what to put it. It's a flimsy house of cards, and it's difficult. It's tough to get any lasting, really big change through because it's not in the interest of either state, either Boney or Calvert, to let Crossbow stand on its own legs. They want a weak Crossbow. A prosperous Crossbow, yeah, that wouldn't surprise me, but one beholden on them.
I hadn't thought about this until now, but we can see some parallels between Crossbell in this current state, aka corrupt people at the top with a huge influx of capital, to Russia after the fall of the Soviet Union, where you'd have a bunch of oligarchs taking outside investments and deliberately stopping the state from having control over its own territory because they knew that if the state became strong again, that they would not get their piece of the pie. It's one of the reasons why the political situation in Russia now is incredibly decentralized, and Putin, in order to rule, has to make deals with and manage the oligarchs. He cannot simply dominate them.
Then, now I would say the Siloviki have really been brought under the thumb. And what independent power structures that we do see, semi independent, I should say, are really the securocrats who were brought up in the security services who branched out into corporate or quasi state corporate holdings.
You can agree that Putin's hold on the state having a monopoly on the legitimate use of violence is at the very least not total.
After the events of the past 3 weeks, I would agree with you. And also, please don't curse at
Yeah.
me. I have never done the same to you.
No, never. You've never called me a bitch. You've never called me anything like this.
But back to Crossbell, it feels so real. It's not grounded in whatever fantasy magic shenanigans. It's real world issues from real world problems that stem from one to the other, and it's so well done.
Indeed. And I'm excited to see more and more of it so we can keep talking about it.
Now, shall we get into something beyond the first 120 seconds of the actual game?
I think so. I think so. Where did you want to go from here?
Let's get into the first 180 seconds of the game, where we meet the members of the SSS.
So, first off, we have the leader, Lloyd Bannings. Then we have Ellie McDowell. We have Tio Plato, slash Tio Plato, but Plato. And then we have Rundy Orlando.
Colin, you know how I said
What?
how excited I was
You know what?
for people closer to our age?
Yeah.
Colin,
The best part is that even Lloyd, who is 18, and therefore still incredibly young, and literally just got out of the academy and is now entering the police force, goes, "What the fuck? Why are you here? You're 14."
he's a detective. Usually in police, you have to spend several years as a beat cop before you can take your detective exam. It's supposed to allow you to familiarize yourself with the street, with the grunt work, but it seems to be mostly you just pick up a collection of bad habits. Okay, that will likely be edited out. So, Lloyd is a detective, and we see he's earnest. He's a natural leader. He's from Crossbell. He spent time away. Now, what's his team? We have a lot of them feel like stereotypes, caricatures. But one thing I want to say that's new, they haven't worked together before. They don't know each other. Joshua and Estelle, Reese and Kevin, these are strangers who come, they're colleagues more than anything, and that's a really interesting dynamic. So, why don't you tell us about, say, Ellie?
Sure. So, at least first impressions that we get from here, I don't want to go into the fullness of her backstory because we'll find that out as we play. But she is a sharpshooter. Uh, said what? Yes, I guess because her last name is McDowell. So Ellie McDowell is a sharpshooter. She's from Crossbell as well. And in terms of personality, you really do get the sense that she is not above some forms of manipulation, both in terms of when you find a kid, when you find Henri in the pipes in the geofront, she knows how to calm him down and then bring him to safety. But also then when you go to what are they called? The Vipers, the Saber Vipers hideout. I need to get in. She's very good at flirting with Dino in order to get entrance into the gang hideout.
Yes, I was a bit apprehensive about that part. It's always, maybe I'm just a stick in the mud. I'm just always, that agreement was fast. Wow. I'm always wary of, objectively intelligent woman characters just resorting to, quote, feminine wiles, end quote, to get what they want, and sometimes it feels like it's cheapening them. Is that happening here? No. It's just something I noticed, and I guess I hope it does not become too much of a pattern, or she does not become flanderized into that trait where it dominates her.
Sure, it's a good point to make. But beyond that, what you really do get the sense of with Ellie is that she's duty driven, and she's very good at support. She identifies herself as she wants a strong leader that she can support. She doesn't want to be the leader.
What do you know? What role does she play in the game? What's her unit? She's ranged. She has access to some good wind aura in the beginning. You can unlock her to be more of a mage and support character, and that meshes with her personality, how she is presented in her interactions with the characters, with the world.
Right. And if you look at her S craft, for instance, right, everybody else's S crafts are offense focused, whereas Ellie heals you, can even bring you back from being KO'd. It's very useful if you do it in the right place. So I kind of like that that game narrative connection.
I'll take Randy because if I were to talk about Tio, I would get annoyed. I'll leave that to you. So, Randy is brash, bold, and buff. He wields a halberd. He stands in the front lines. He likes being the center of attention, the center of enemy fights. He deals damage. He takes damage. He's a tank. But he's perceptive. He's not as dumb as he lets on. He knows what's going on behind the scenes in the city. And you know how a lot of times people with, say, street knowledge they use that as a defense mechanism for lacking formal education. No, not here. Randy's knowledge of the backside of the city, his sensing, what's going on with the development, who's that leaving behind, that makes him a very real, important contributor to the team, and he gets to showcase that at several times. There's a great quote of his, we'll talk about it in more detail later. Behind all the city's neon lights, there are demons lurking in the shadows. And if that's not a summary of what this game I think will be, I'm not sure what is.
No, I agree with everything that you've said, but especially in terms of like the team makeup and how the team's characters and their character traits kind of work together. I mean, if you ask Randy why he got kicked off the defense force, he basically says it's because he fucked too much. He was hooking up with too many of his coworkers. He has posters of bikini ladies on the wall. His room is a big ass couch and a bunch of liquor bottles. This stands at a huge contrast to Ellie, who's, prim, proper, almost like upper class bearing to her, right? But never do you get the sense that Randy is hiding who he is from Ellie. Even gives her a nickname, Mademoiselle, which that's a localization decision, but one that I think works well. It was something else in the original translations, but I don't remember what it was. In any case, they play well off of each other in the fact that they stand at contrasts. But instead of trying to change who they are to fit the other, instead they simply accept each other for who they are. And we can see in their conversations throughout this prologue, I mean, there is disagreement amongst the four members. They don't immediately congeal into one party and just everybody's fine, the way that you normally would get in a JRPG. They are colleagues, so they work together, and they find their way through it. But you also get the sense that they have not earned that sense of deep attachment yet that you do see in the opening.
But also, sometimes, found family is such a theme in a lot of media in the Kaseki series that we've seen so far, but disagreement is good. I want to give you a quote from Supernatural, Colin, that I think applies to some dynamics of the found family in the Kaseki series. An angel says, Sam and Dean Winchester are psychotically, irrationally, neurotically, erotically codependent for each other. Right? Disagreement is good. Some of the almost cultish, I'm being hyperbolic for comedic effect, agreement that we can see in the Kaseki series and the games we've played thus far can get a bit, So, you like Kool-Aid, don't you? Because they've drunk the Kool-Aid.
Yeah, I mean, especially once you I got it. It's kind of like in Trials the Third, in which everybody is congealed together, and basically everybody has to say that they agree, right? It gets a little bit tiresome. Now, I will say, like in the prologue, what you get a different form of it. You know, you get more like a, oh, I hadn't thought of that before. Lloyd, you are so smart. And then maybe you get like a little bit of back and forth. Everybody will end up agreeing. That's not, it's not like there's a deep division in the team. Lloyd is definitely the leader, and everybody will come to the point of agreement. But it's at least less boring to read than 12 dialogue boxes telling you that everybody agrees and is ready to be the support.
Correct. And with the empty rooms in the SSS headquarter building, I'm sure our ranks will expand. And so by the end of Azure, yes, that's right, good to know, will be the subject of many a complaint from Kevin.
Well, we'll see. I'm not going to confirm nor deny. But speaking of complaints from Kevin, we still need to talk about Tio Plato.
Colin. Tia was 14 years old. And yes, this
Yeah,
is
she is.
seen as a wild outlier. But that is the bare effing minimum, Colin. A wild outlier for young should be 18. These should be like mid 20s. Tio should be 18. I do not understand this. But you know what? Give me the courage to change the things I can, the serenity to accept what cannot be changed, and the wisdom to know the difference. And Colin, I rolled a 20 on my wisdom check. This is something I cannot change. Tio is a mage. She casts spells, low strength, high ATS. She has a magic staff. The first we've seen. Previous mages used a rapier like Chloe, pistol like Olivier. This is something new, as she said.
Kevin, let me just remind you of something, because there have
No.
been a couple of times in this series specifically in which you have right off the bat said, I don't like this person. Ren, Luva. And then as you get to know the characters, you found yourself eating crow, especially with Ren. How many times have you gone on tirades about how she's a murderous little bitch that needs to be excised, and why are we putting up with her? And then when we get to the end of Trails the Third, you realize that her story is incredible, and you felt terrible for all of the things that you have said about her. Now, I'm not saying nothing about any other character's backstory or what have you. All I'm saying is maybe you should be a bit more charitable with your judgments about characters.
Mm, no.
All right, well, now that we've had this very good talk, I have to say, personally speaking, I don't like the archetype that Tio represents character-wise. I mean, I like her fine as a character. My kind of like you, Kevin. I'm not a fan of the way younger than usual, kind of robotic, I don't know, half computer, half person that we kind of see in anime. I will say there was not a whole lot of tropes in FCSC other than Joshua a little bit. Here we're starting to see that there are some tropes that Falcom is using. I don't think ineffectively. Again, I do like Tio. I just don't love her like some people do. But let's see how her backstory unfolds and how the trope is expanded upon and developed upon.
She's really into the internet analog, the Orbital Information Project or the Orbital Network, because she is so young, she can adapt to this new changing technology. Fortify yourself. And then let's get into the next topic of discussion, which is, Colin, there's some changes to how combat is done.
Well, I think we have a lot more to go over before we talk about combat, don't you think? Such as why the SSS exists in the first place?
We get that after our first explorations in Geofront.
Sure. Okay. In that case, then let us discuss combat. Because you're right, there are some innovations. It's nothing. There's no drastic changes, but there are some things that change how you approach stuff and that reward you for playing a certain way. So why don't you tell us what they are?
There's two things, two major things I noticed, and tell me if there's any I missed. One, positioning is more important. You can attack enemies from behind now to stun them and get favorable more turns before the enemy attacks. That was in the previous games to an extent, but you had to go touch them with your avatar from behind. Whereas here, to get the maximum, you have to uh, attack them on the overmap to stun them. One. Two, why you want to do this, there's XP multipliers. If you do certain basic challenges, I guess you would call them, in combat, that allows you to gain higher XP variables 1.2, 1.4, 1.5, what say you, to gain more XP. It encourages and rewards you for playing smarter.
Absolutely. One thing that I would say, just for historical context, as it were, the hitting it, unless I'm completely wrong about this, I don't think that I am, but the whole hitting enemies in order to stun them originally comes from Trails from Azure. But then with these new versions, because the North American ports are based off of the Kai versions, which are they were remakes for the PS4 back in Japan, and that's what got ported over here. So it kind of backported that feature in. They also the same thing happened with the Sky Vita ports, where you could hit enemies on the overworld on that too. Even though you cannot do it on the PC version, because those are based off of the original PC ports from way back in the day. But it's a nice feature to have, absolutely.
And you said the Kai ports, they make explicit characters who were later said to be in Crossbell with the people at the time. You can see them now.
Yeah, this is way more prevalent in Azure, but there are characters in the Cold Steel arc throughout all of the games. Yes, the first two, but also then even into 3 and 4, that would have made sense for them to have been present during the events of Azure that were not originally there, and so the Kai games went back and put them in, which is nice for continuity reasons. The other main thing for combat, there's a couple of quality life things, and then also one new mechanic that we've seen so far. The new mechanic is Team Rush. This happens random. It happens randomly. It's kind of in the same way that you can get like a critical bonus or heal 10% of your health bonus, which means that you can an enemy can steal it from you or vice versa. So you have to plot around that. But it basically a more powerful attack in which everybody attacks all at once, and it can trigger around a certain area. It's not something you can plan around, really. It's something you have to react to, but they're nice when they happen.
One thing I noticed, you do not get much CP when you do the team rush. So if you need to build CP among the people, I'm fairly confident you don't get the full 10 for each attack like you would under normal settings. Is that correct, or is that because I'm doing this on Nightmare?
I can't say I noticed. It wouldn't surprise me. The whole point of the team rush is to kill the enemies quickly, not to build CP. So I wouldn't surprise me if you're right about that. But also, you can, even when you land on that turn, you're able to say no to the team rush, right? So maybe that's why.
And often I did. Oh, also, I want to make it known I'm better than you, Colin, because I'm doing Nightmare.
Sure, I'm playing on normal because I want to enjoy myself.
I enjoyed it too, except the very, very, very frustrating boss fight that made me twitch an eye.
Sure. Well, before we talk about that, I just want to mention one thing that thank fucking God this game has, and it also was not in the original version of Zero, I'm fairly certain. But when you do S-Crafts now, Kevin, you can press the start button and skip the animation.
You can do turbo mode in combat on the overmap, set the speed 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, I believe, times normal, and just bip through all sorts of stuff you don't want to do.
I think that level of control is tied to the PC version, but I just like, 'cause, like, if you think about it with FC and SC, like there's a high speed mode for PS4, PS5, but you don't have that level of control over it. You just have what button turns it on and not. But like whenever you do an S-Craft, I would always fast forward through it, but it still took like a good 10-20 seconds, right? So much time is going to be saved just being able to hit the start button and have Crimson Gale or whatever go off. So why don't you complain about the first boss battle, which isn't even really a boss battle?
You have an objective. You have to keep your people alive, two NPCs, two civilian kids. I learned later that if you keep them from taking any damage, you get more DP. And I essentially had to do that because one hit from them, these frost slimes would kill the NPCs. And Colin,
Yeah.
I learned that you have to change the tactics so that all of your party is as forward as possible to attract the aggro, the hate of the slimes. I did not do that, so I had to, Colin, let me tell you, I had to hope for misses when the frost slimes would attack the NPCs, which is not a very high probability until I could use my S craft to kill and attack as needed. That was a frustrating fight, Colin.
That sounds horrible. Absolutely horrible. Playing a normal, I didn't deal with that. Now, granted, I did get Rio got attacked, so I didn't get the extra DP from that. I don't particularly care about getting full DP in those games, but I try to get as much as I can when I'm cognizant of it. Of which there's a secret quest that I think you probably missed that we'll talk about later, because I neglected to tell you about it. But you're given two options where you can either attack them from the back, like attack the enemies, or you can drag them towards you. You can distract them. I believe if you want to get the kids not to get hit at all, you're supposed to distract them so they start attacking you and not the kids. Whereas I was just like, oh, let's take party advantage, and drove in from the back and had my advantage.
A couple of times in just the prologue, you had two different options of ways you want to do things, and that is not something that we really saw, correct me if I'm wrong, in FC, in SC, in the third.
Definitely not in the third, because there was no BP DP mechanic. DP is basically the same thing as BP in this game. We did have something like it in FC and SC, for example, in the beginning of FC, kind of in a similar position, where you go up to the tower in order to save some kids, and one of them is under attack by monsters. Estelle has the choice to either go forward or to hang back and do it with Joshua. And you're supposed to hang back and attack them with Joshua. In my opinion, though, Estelle obviously would have attacked first. But if you hang back and do the smart thing, you get additional BP from that. But it's definitely not as common, and it's normally like once a mission, whereas I mean we've seen it multiple times in the prologue already, and it's not even just combat related. It's also making a deduction for a case where you have to pick the right option so that Lloyd can deduce what had happened. And if you select correctly, you get extra DP.
And that brings home a really important difference between what our occupations in this game versus FC and SC. In the first two, you're bracers. There's not that much deduction going on. You have missions and targets. Here, we have cases, investigations, and mysteries. Colin, what do people in Crossbell think of the police? With the bracers an active force in the city, what's their opinions on the police forces?
Nobody seems to think the police are good at doing their jobs, especially when it comes to dealing with the concerns of the citizens themselves. They're far more likely to turn to the Bracer Guild. Their big head honcho, Arios MacLean, Arios, the divine blade of wind, is seen as like the guardian of Crossbell. He gets all the good press attention. There are scenes later on that you can see just by talking to random NPCs where like women idolize him and want to marry him. You know, he is like high tier celebrity status for Crossbell, and it's because he's good at what he does. But there is absolutely no faith in state institutions to keep the civilians safe at all. And the whole reason why the special support section is created is in order to essentially copy the Bracer Guild and start to earn back some of the trust from the populace.
It's a blatant copy. It's a blatant ripoff. That's one of the in-game reasons you're told to do the support quests. Otherwise, the bracers will get to it, and we need all the help for our reputation that we can get. And one thing I want to bring up about differences between the bracers and the police, Lloyd has a really interesting comment about why they do what they do and how, and especially as it relates to civilians. I think it's pretty cynical.
I don't think at all, but I think we're interpreting it differently. So why don't you give your interpretation first?
Well, he says, after all, we're not bracers. We don't prioritize the safety of civilians as they do.
Yes. But do you remember what he says immediately thereafter?
Randy says, whoa there, pal. Elle says, wait a minute, Lloyd. And then my photo cuts off.
Okay, so this is also something like way later in the game, in which Lloyd is deciding that yes, he wants to take on the position of the SSS. Later in the chapter, I should say. But what he states is that there are jobs that the Bracer Guild, by virtue of the fact that their whole credo is to put the safety of civilians above all else, they are prevented from doing certain things. Such as, we've already seen this, they are unable to investigate the state. They're not allowed to interfere with matters of state. Now we're in Crossbell, which is known to be incredibly corrupt. So something that Lloyd brings up is that as police, they are able to go after things like that. They are able to go after, say, a dirty politician who's being bought off by the mafia, or an illicit drug deal that isn't directly harming the citizens, right? They can look for deeper issues, whereas the bracers have to be petitioned to do something by the citizenry and then fulfill that task.
Someone needs standing to get the bracers involved.
Yeah, I think that's a good way of putting it. I mean, it's not completely true because we've seen like Arios follows Henri and Ryu into the Geofront because he recognizes that they need to be saved, and they're kind of observing the Arios is observing the SSS to see how well we would do. There's something that we kind of brushed over is that we end up being saved by Arios, right? Who then steals all the credit for it when the newspaper comes around. But Arios seems, perfectly fine just doing that and saving the kids without having been requested to do it. But it's still of his own volition, and it is directly tied to the safety of these kids, not to we need to deal with public safety by exterminating all of the monsters in the Geofront and make sure that these kids can't accidentally fall into a manhole.
Exactly. And about the bracers and the police and the SSS. So the SSS you would think would be a popular institution in the police force. The bracers get a lot of positive news press. The police has a bad reputation, so something set up to let the police shine, you would imagine, would be well liked. But that's not the case at all.
No, there seems to be, I would say, three factions that we can discern. One is pro SSS, which is mostly Sergey, and then a couple of other people that are like friendly with Sergey that are willing to give you encouragement. Then you get the people, kind of like that detective that you run into going into Grimwood's law office. His name is Dudley, but we'll see him again. Who see the SSS as not real cops, because it's not the duty of the cops to be the Bracer Guild. Their duty is to do other things, like investigate crimes, which the SSS are not doing. Like, that's not their job. They end up doing it as a byproduct, but it's not why they exist. So there's the dismissive. There's the they're not real cops. And then you get people like the vice commissioner that view this as a threat to his own influence because this is something that Sergey wants. And Sergey's always getting his way, and the vice commissioner doesn't like that, so he's trying to sabotage it in order to keep his own power within the institution of the police.
And I like that one especially because it's petty. It does not serve a larger ideological function. It's office politics and one player protecting his turf from what he seems to be an intrusion upon it. The actual benefits, the good it will do to help the oath that he, I assume, swore, that is not irrelevant to his considerations and his actions.
No, not at all. So we see a little bit of, I guess, realism in a way that we hadn't really seen. Wait, it's not to say that FC and SC weren't realistic. I mean, we got a lot of mileage taking realistic or realpolitik views and analyses of different parts of the political situation of FC and SC. But there's an extra layer here. It's like somebody really sat down and studied how a city works and then meant to show us all of it in its glory and in its travesty to us, the player. And somehow managed to do all of this in the fucking prologue.
Because the city is a character in this game, I will go so far as to say it's a living, breathing, dynamic, super organism character. It's big. We see so many more stages, areas, maps of the city than we do even for Grand Cell and FC and SE. It's different parts. We go get a tour of almost all of it in the prologue, and we can see how the people live differently, how they experience, and it's really good. There's lots of winners from all the growth and development, and there's people who all this good success has passed them by.
So before we dive into that, because I know you want to talk about the downtown area specifically, but I want to praise the design choice to have Crossbell be this expansive. And as you'll see, Crossbell is basically the hub. We go out of Crossbell to like visit different villages and stuff like that, but we always come back to Crossbell. There's always stuff to do in Crossbell. And do you remember how, like in FC or SC, at the end of every plot point, you can go and talk to NPCs and all the dialogue will change? Well, we were kind of okay. You
Yes.
could go to Roland, and then once you hit a certain point, you couldn't go back to Roland anymore. Like so, like the Roland NPCs are done, but that doesn't happen here. Here, the
No.
entire city of Crossbell, every single NPC is going to change their dialogue on every single story beat, which, I don't know, anywhere from 2 to 5 times a chapter. So you can really spend a lot of time just living in this city. On top of that, have you ever played The Witcher 1?
I have not. No.
The Witcher 1 largely takes place in the city of Vizima, or at least one of the chapters is in the city of Vizima, and it takes quite a few hours to get through. And what you end up doing in Vizima is running around a lot, going to this place and that place and this place and that place, to the point where after a while you stop needing the map because you just know where everything is. You feel like you've now learned Vizima.
Yeah.
The same thing happens very quickly with Crossbell. And Crossbell is our hub for the next 2 games. Coming back to it, immediately, I knew where everything was. I knew where Highway was. I knew where Ismelda's bar was, where the Jazz Bar was, where Larkin Ciel is, where the IBC is, where downtown is. I know the whole map of Crossbell by memory. And I haven't played these games. Thank you. I haven't played these games since 2021 when, COVID hit. So Crossbell makes a huge impression on you because the designers, yeah, so even longer. I could say that I don't have a PhD in chronology, but I do have one in history, so it's not the best thing for me to fuck up. In any case, by deciding to have us constantly live and breathe in this city, you really learn to love the city as the characters do. And that's one of the reasons why I'm so excited that we finally got into the Crossbell arc, because I love this location. Not just the characters, not just the plot. I love Crossbell. And it kind of feels like I'm coming home again to be back here.
In FC and SC, we went to a city, we did the missions, and then we left. You could go back, but the game wanted you to continue on to move forward. Here, the game is telling us this is your home for the foreseeable future. Live in it, get to know it. And it feels like they put in the work necessary to, I don't know, to make this a worthwhile
Yeah.
effort, a good endeavor.
And they even have some side stuff. I don't remember if it's specifically allowed in the prologue, but when I first played through Zero, I got into the habit of every time I would like come back to the city from a mission or have a break, I would go to the casino. You can play poker there. You can play blackjack there, just like you can in the door for Gambler Jack in the third. But it's built in to the game. It's a location in the game. But then it's like, okay, I'll just go relax and play some blackjack. And that kind of thing lets you kind of role play living in the city.
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
All right, so you want to talk about the downtrodden, about the subaltern.
I do. And that's the meat of the second part of the prologue. The first quest involves getting to Geofront, slaying the monster. The second quest involves getting to Geofront, yes.
We have to go to the geofront twice, but then we're called to go to the downtown area to deal with gangs that are fighting.
Yes, Colin, as I was explaining that before you so rudely interrupted me, which again, I would never do to you.
You've never done. That's absolutely true.
So we go to downtown, It's a forgotten part of Crossbell, not seen much investment. The state does not have a big active presence here. And we can see that because in this void, nature abhors a vacuum. So do societies. Gangs have stepped in. Gangs form when the state is unwilling or unable to perform basic societal, institutional functions. And so private actors and organizations step in to have their own attempted monopoly on violence, complete with territory. We see this here, two competing factions. The Testaments and the Saber Knights have stepped in upon the dissolution of effective governance in the downtown area. They claim to represent the people, the citizens, and that's a big component of why they fight.
They don't claim to represent the people. Why do they claim to do that?
Not in a democratic way, but the leaders do talk about how it's not just like being doing crime for the sake of criming. It's about downtown. They talk in detail about downtown has been forgotten and they're here to step in.
I mean, they definitely say, like, the police don't have any authority here, so when the SSS step in to say, hey, stop fighting, they kind of laugh in their face. And definitely Wald and Waji, see themselves as looking after their gangs, so like when one of their boys is being beaten up, they feel the responsibility to go beat up or even kill the other gang. But you'll have to give me textual evidence. In no way do I see Wald specifically, but also Waji as being a leader of the community in the downtown area. They don't give a fuck about the normal people.
I'll find you that textual evidence, and then you will see my speculation was anything but. And speaking of speculation,
Well, I'm happy for that. Also, they're called the Saber Vipers, not the Saber Knights.
I accept this criticism and I hate you. So, the big item is a supposed attack of each gang upon the other in a surprise ambush. We learn that it does not add up, and it is the instigation of a third secret force, the Mafia Hayu, that does not usually involve itself in these petty matters, but wants to essentially take out the heads of the gangs and absorb the remnants into the growing power structure.
I don't know if they necessarily mentioned they wanted. Well, I guess they do because they tried to recruit the gangs, and the heads of the gangs had said no. It's not Highway that's doing it. It's the fact that we have the mafia that had previously been in charge of the underworld, and then Highway moved in, which is this is the Crossbellian branch of a larger criminal organization that's present in Calvert, and so now the mafia have competition, but they cannot recruit like Jaeger Corps because that would call too much attention to themselves. So they're trying to get the recruitment of people from the Testaments and the Scarlet Vipers on account of the fact that nobody cares about them, so they can take them into the mafia.
And it's interesting about the Jaeger Corps and how they can't do it. Highway knows they have a lot of power. Crossbell knows the Mafia has a lot of power. And as long as Highway does not act too openly in flouting the impotence of the Crossbell government, everyone is content to not bring out into the open, one, what they know about the relative strengths of one versus the other, or two, make an open contest within the supposedly safe, neutral buffer state that is still able to look after its own borders.
I really feel like you're putting way too much credit on if Hayaway has power and Hayaway knows that they can't reveal themselves yet, because that has not been discussed.
This is textual.
No, this is not textual.
You're misreading. Lecter and Randy are talking about.
Number one, his name is Randy, not Lecter. Number two, you are misreading that entire thing. The point is the Mafia has all of the members of the Diet in their pocket. And they know that they can get away with doing their particular kinds of crimes, but they can't do like massive pieces of violence or things that would call attention to it, like hiring Jaeger Corps to destroy shit, because at that point, members of the Diet would have to do something on account of the fact that they're elected representatives. But they can still fight Hayaway. That's why they're recruiting people the from the downtown area, because at some point they know they're going to have a conflict. But conflicts between the Mafia and Hayaway are unlikely to call members of the Diet to have regulation or anything like that, so long as it doesn't go into the public view. But I don't think we haven't seen any evidence that Hayaway gives a crap about any of that, because we haven't met Hayaway yet.
I will find textual evidence and then, Colin, and then you will see.
I'm starting to feel like we should have a sidebar called Kevin proves his speculation with textual evidence. Something that I wanted to, while you're looking for textual evidence, something that I wanted to note. This is kind of hidden in a side quest. We're given a side quest to go and count up vacancies in the city, like houses that don't have people in them anymore. They have a record, and we need to go double check. And in the rich people area, the government knows precisely this one house, it's vacant, it's been vacant for years, not a problem. Then in the eastern quarter, they're right that there's a vacant apartment, but they get the address wrong. And in fact, we walk into the Fisherman's Guild, who then can point us in the right direction. So, like, it's close to approximate knowledge, but even in the eastern quarter, like, there's not exact knowledge on the side of the state. And then when you get into downtown, we're told that there are 3 vacant apartments when in fact there's only 1, which kind of shows that the government really is not caring all that much about the downtown area. And I think that it's interesting that we see that the government is really good with its records for like the rich people, for the notables, and then as it gets farther and farther away into the immigrants from Calvert or into the downtrodden people downtown, their exactitude of knowledge diminishes because it's not as important to them. I suppose one could make the connection.
Yeah, the state's ability to exert its will is hampered by a lack of knowledge because it is unable to exert its will. It's a circular process.
Also, on top of that, notice how they are not checking this themselves. They ask the SSS to do it. Like, could you imagine if City Hall asked the police to go do their job for them?
Police don't want to do their own job.
Exactly. So have you found textual evidence to prove me wrong yet?
Hey, Colin, why don't you shut up?
So, one thing that we haven't talked about yet, and we do need to talk about it, is the role of the press. Right? The Crossbell Times is brought up. Yep.
Oh, one question I have. You say people distrust all the politicians, the Diet faction, because they're clearly in the pockets of Araboni and Calvert, except Leader McDowell. Is Elle related to him?
Well, her name is Ellie, not Elle. And
No. Is Ellie?
I mean, I'm not sure if I should answer that question because it's part of the story, but I will confirm that they have the same last name and that Ellie seems very knowledgeable about political situations.
Is she a Nepo baby?
Maybe. I guess we'll see, won't we? Yes, she is related to Leader McDowell. But actually, let's talk about that before we talk about the press, because something that we haven't really talked about, but is interesting, is that both Arabonia and Calvert have a very real presence in Calvert. For one, they're bribing tons of members of the Diet, so that we can at least now roughly say half of them side with Arabonia, half of them side with Calvert, but there's also the presence of troops from both sides in the city of Calvert, right? There are Imperial troops who are running custom checks on the trains for people coming into Arabonia. I think the same is true of Calvert, but I can't claim to know precisely off the top of my head. But even just in the readings about buffer states that I've been doing lately to prepare for a buffer state project, it's not that usual for both states to share a degree of sovereignty over an autonomous area, which is what we seem to have here in Crossbell. And I'm wondering what you thought about that.
Usually, The less actual independence a state or region has, the more tenacious they are about preserving the fiction or preserving and guarding what they do possess. But here, like, we know Crossbell has some sort of separate military, the Guardian Force, that Randy was a part of. That Lecter, no, Randy was a part of.
For some reason, Kevin thinks that all redheads look the same.
And that they garrison fortresses on the border. And for them to
Yeah.
give up some really essential aspects of sovereignty, customs checks, which is very close to revenue, and that is one of the central state prerogatives, that says a lot about Crossbell, I think.
Yeah, it's weird. And also, like, the whole point of Crossbell is that it's this economic powerhouse. We're also starting to see it become a technological powerhouse. It has the internet has not yet been developed. It's being beta tested in Crossbell. Just like America was the first place to have the internet, that gave us a huge leg up from the 80s going into the 90s, going into the 2000s. So Crossbell could be a technological leader. It's a financial leader, but it is definitely not a military leader. And I think it'll be interesting to see how that impacts the ability for Crossbell to make decisions for itself.
The more attractive Crossbell becomes, the more stuff, technology it has without a corresponding increase in its military, that will make it a more and more attractive target for direct intervention. And I bet one or both sides will invade at some point
Sure.
in this series. I bet that is somehow the main instigating plot will be about foreign intervention more than Ouroboros.
Let's talk about the press quickly, because we've seen Grace Lynn now twice. Once when Arios is given credit for saving Henri and Ryu, but also we see Grace kind of give the SSS the final push in order to make the connections between what's going on with the gangs and the mafia. So what are your thoughts about Grace's character, first off, and her relationship with the SSS?
Well, for a member of the fake news, she's not so terrible, I guess. She really is not beholden to the government, and that's an admirable quality for a journalist to have, for a reporter to possess. She's not, what do you say, odd or doesn't want to impress them. She sees herself as an equal to these members of the state apparatus. She's willing to help if she, in her independent estimation, thinks it's worth it for either her own goals or for some nebulous public good, but she's not automatically giving all she knows to the government, to the SSS. So that's a really interesting dynamic.
I mean, she quite clearly makes it a quid pro quo. She gives them the information so that she can get the scoop.
And you like to see it.
You'll like to see it. And you also have to see Lloyd grapple with that fact of the job because, that's not what he thought that he would be doing. He's kind of prim and proper too. And he's learning that in order to be the detective that he wants to be, he has to do things like have a meal with a reporter and let the reporter give some gossip and then turn around and scratch that reporter's back as well.
Give something to get something. He maybe naively would expect it's your civic duty, tell me everything. Like, that would work almost, but it doesn't. This is not the fantasy land novel, whatever. It's Crossbell.
And I don't think that Lloyd even gives the whole duty thing. And one of his traits is that he gives cheesy ass speeches, which we haven't talked about yet. I want to get your opinion on this. But even he recognizes, even if he doesn't like the having to schmooze with the reporter, he's also not assuming that the reporter's just going to help him. Like, he already has some realistic tendencies.
And why does he want to be a detective?
So this is something that's very integral to Lloyd's backstory and to his personality. He clearly admires his brother, Guy, who had been a detective in the CPD, but he was killed in the line of duty. So Lloyd is now following in his footsteps, and part of what he has to grapple with is, will the SSS actually let him do that? Because he became a detective and now he's basically a bracer, and he ultimately decides to keep going with it. But it's through his flashbacks with Guy that we kind of see Lloyd, the values that he has in respect to his brother, but also the kind of family that he still has left. His parents are dead. He seemed to have been living with aunts and uncles that I don't think are his blood relatives. They just happen to take him in. But the close.
No, because otherwise, what Celine and her interactions with him would have seemed even more inappropriate.
Well, there's nobody named Celine. Um,
His aunt,
I don't remember the aunt's name. You never see them again.
Celise?
Okay, so Guy's girlfriend, Cecile, is like kind of like a sister thing, but also not at all his aunt. They're more like siblings slash a little bit more protective, loving kind of a thing.
God, swear to fucking Christ, if you get more incest shit, Colin.
I will say that Cecile is canonically hot.
Wonderful. Um, we Guy is it's difficult to give character someone who is one dead. Two, he's almost worth more as a plot device to keep Lloyd going than a living, well, not living, but a full fleshed out person. I bet his murder is somehow going to be tied into what's going on.
Sure, fair enough. I mean, makes sense narratologically. It's brought up very early on, multiple times, right?
It's not going to be what a senseless murder. Oh yeah, we caught the guy a week later. He's in jail.
No, I mean, we already know that they don't know what happened to him, right? Ian Grimwood, who we haven't talked about yet. He's this lawyer who he's known for helping out like politicians, constitutionalists, all of this, but also helps the common man. All I was saying is that Grimwood had said that he did his own investigation into the murder of Guy and couldn't figure out who did it. Nobody knows what happened to Guy.
Guy did it to himself. Nah, I don't think so. But Grimward, on the surface, you would think something like him, with his qualities and characteristics, would be kind of, gosh, that's kind of weird and slightly off-putting. Someone not in the government who clearly exercises large amounts of soft, hidden power and influence, who has economic powers, who dabbles in civilian social situations as he sees fit, and it's presented as an almost unalloyed good.
I mean, I think that kind of makes sense for everything we've known about Crossbell so far, right? Where people put a lot of trust in maybe their neighbor or in private things, and they don't put a lot of trust in the government, with the exception of Leader McDowell, who we haven't met yet. So having Grimwood be like this respected patron, helper on the outside of the state, I don't know. To me, it makes sense with the vision of Crossbell that we've been given so far.
It seems like a pretty weak government, and I would not be surprised if they really enforce the law in the entertainment district and other areas where tourists are known to congregate and gather. But like we saw with downtown, outside those areas, they can kind of fend for themselves.
Well, you know what else can fend for itself, Kevin?
Not my cat. Not your cat.
No, nor mine. Not my cat. But what can fend for itself is the motherfucking soundtrack of this game. I know that, I hope to God, by the way, that you didn't pull at FC and just listen to your own music while you were playing this game.
No.
Good.
I will never get over that, will I?
I know you will not. And especially not with the Crossbell games, because this soundtrack, it's so good. Even from the prologue, I mean, that's the sound that's being played when you're capturing the mafia guys at the end. It's a track called Intense Chase. And I love that track. It is so good. It's high octane. It's making you feel like you're in the midst of a chase. Like you're in the midst of a fight. But the battle theme goes hard. The boss theme goes hard. The songs just walking around Crossbell make it go bim and bop. I've been listening to the soundtrack for days now that we've been playing it again. I love it. I absolutely love it. And if you don't too, you're dead to me.
It's good. Like,
It's good.
I mean, it's. I don't know what more you want me to say, Colin. I liked it. It's another seamless component in a really good entry. You shit.
But you know what's not a seamless component? I'm really good at my transitions today.
I think you're dead wrong on this, but go ahead.
Well, there's a reason for this. It is well known that the PS4 and the PS5 versions have worse graphics than the Switch and the PC versions. And I thought that I wouldn't notice it because in still images I didn't really notice it. But the PC and the Switch versions have much sharper upscaled textures than the PS4 and PS5 versions do. But I can notice it. The character models don't look as sharp as when I first played it on the PC. There's like a shot to the Belheim apartments that Lloyd takes when he's looking out from the SSS building that just looks straight up ugly on the PS5, and it really shouldn't. I'm frankly shocked they didn't change this version at all. They really should have done the upscaling textures. And I'm still going to play the PS4, PS5 version, but only because I want the trophies on my account. I have seriously considered starting over on the Steam Deck just so I can have the better graphics, but I'm probably not going to. But if you don't care about trophies, I would highly, highly recommend doing it on the Switch or on the PC and avoid the PS4, PS5 version. Which is a shame to say because it's my preferred platform.
Sucks to suck. I thought the graphics were great.
I mean, they're certainly better than, like, Sky Games, right, in terms of character
Yeah.
model
Yeah.
details. Also, camera angles are more dynamic.
Yes.
So
Yes.
it's a much better presentation, and it really it feels like it's a step up technology-wise.
Overall, I thought it was a fantastic prologue. I'm super excited to explore this game, the characters, see the plot unfurl. We don't have an obvious inciting incident the way we do with why are we in Phantasma? What's Phantasma? Where's Joshua? What happened to Cassius? It feels a bit more organic, slower paced. They feel more confident. They don't have to show their hand up front, and they've earned it.
I mean, that's something that I really like about this series, especially now that we've gotten through the Sky arc. It's they know the audience they have. They know they can ask us to be patient. But I would also say that this prologue, we talked a bit in the first prologue of FC about how they're kind of showing us a little bit of everything in terms of gameplay, in terms of character interactions, in terms of themes, in the same way that, like, the first book of Herodotus' histories is programmatic. And the same thing is true with this prologue, but the things that are in it, especially for me and you, being political junkies, historians, there's more meat already. We've been talking for over an hour, and it doesn't feel that way.
No, it is not at all. It's a rich, deeply constructed world that we will slowly unveil layer by layer.
So, one last question for you before we close things out. But, we had you do some predictions before you knew anything about this game. Now you've played about 4 hours. Do you have any pressing predictions or thoughts about what might happen for this game? You've alluded to some already, but do you have any others?
Yee's death will be a huge something in the game. Don't know what exactly. Maybe just backstory. Maybe it'll cause us to gain or lose an ally. It'll be something. I think that is a very safe one to bet. One. Two, either Erebonia or Crossbell or Calvard or
Okay.
both will directly invade. Three, the society will not be a big component. Four, we will not have many
Okay.
in-depth interactions with characters that we've seen before, that we've played
Okay.
from the first arc, i.e. Joshua, Estelle, Ren. We'll see them, but it'll be homages, not components of the plot.
Oh, one thing that I said I would mention, but then forgot to mention, but this is something to keep an eye out for while you're playing, because I didn't even see this the first time. There are hidden quests. There were in FC and SC as well. I didn't really talk about them much, but for instance, if you went to the Bracer Guild after talking to Grace at the Long Lao Cafe or whatever it's called, he'll give you a quiz that if you guess all of it right, you get 5 extra DP, and it's pretty entertaining to do. So if you don't want to miss stuff like that, I would recommend playing with a guide to some extent, at least to see when these different secret quests pop up. I plan on doing that myself.
I know Neo Seeker is a good, very thorough, in general, guide depository for RPGs. Is the one
Yeah, and I've been using
for
their guide
Zero,
for this
does
kind
it
of stuff.
have future spoilers?
No, I don't think it has spoilers within the text of it. Obviously, it will list, like, here are all the chapters, which could be a spoiler depending on if you can figure out certain contexts. But there's nothing where it's going to be like, here's the final boss of the game. It's pretty respectful of that.
Good to know.
All right. Is there anything else you want to talk about before we sign off?
It was great to come back, and even greater to come back to a game like this. I'm super excited to go on this journey with you, Colin, and with all the listeners. It'll be great.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it. Zero is one of my favorite games. Azure's even better. We're in for a great time.
Until next time, I'm Kevin. That's Colin. Have a good one.
Thanks for listening, everybody. Bye-bye.